Hey guys, Dylan Allen here from Allen Endurance Coaching. Today we're continuing our training gear series and we're talking about threshold pace. So, threshold pace. What is it? Why do we use it? And what are the things you got to look out for when you are using it in your training? So in terms of numbers, which is the most useful thing when we're actually out there doing the workout, right? It's somewhere between 80 and probably 88% of your maximal heart rate. The other kind of good rule of thumb is it's the pace you can go for roughly an hour before you would keel over. But physiologically, what it is it's the break point to where carbohydrates become a bigger proportion of the fuel mix than fat. Because we have a maximum amount of fat we can burn at any one time, right? And we can only throughput it through our mitochondria so fast. And once we require more energy than we're able to supply by doing that, we have to tap in to the carbohydrates and start working anaerobically, and we end up crossing over that point. We're still burning the same amount of fat, but in order to get more energy, we got to add the high octane stuff in the mix. And so our lactate threshold is where that happens, when all of a sudden that carbohydrate mix goes bloop and increases to more than the amount of fat we're burning. And so why do we use this in our training? Fundamentally, the more fat we can burn at once, the faster we can go while working at a lower heart rate. So what it means is we can conserve our glycogen over a longer run. And so if we're talking about any race that's an hour and a half long or longer, or even really an hour long for some of us, what it means is we can race faster for longer. And that's what we're after, right? For the longer races, is being able to maintain a faster pace for longer. Because we can't work anaerobically for more than an hour and a half. We're going to run out of glycogen, then we hit the wall and we can't go anywhere, right? And so where you got to use the glycogen we have to prime that fat oxidation to turn the fat into ATP to make muscle contractions, et cetera, et cetera. And so we really need to prioritize spending our carbohydrates on that. As soon as we start spending any carbohydrates doing something else, like producing ATP anaerobically, all of a sudden, the duration we can go at that intensity goes, and that's a huge negative for us endurance athletes, right? So threshold training increases, in terms of physics and like physiology, what we're doing is we're increasing the number of mitochondria in our muscle fibers. And if a mitochondria can only throughput so much fat at a time, like we can't change that, but what we can do is we can get multiple mitochondria in series. And so this is just like putting batteries in series in any electronic device. All of a sudden you can supply more power, right? And so that's essentially what we're doing, is we're training our body to build more mitochondria so we can burn more fat at once and produce more energy from fat, so we don't have to tap into those precious carbohydrate reserves to do something other than prime that fat oxidation. If that's what we're trying to do, we need to make sure in training, the goal is to get as close to that crossover point to where carbohydrates are going to become a bigger part of the fuel mix without going over it. Because if we go over it, yeah, we're still stimulating more mitochondrial production, but we also have some waste products that are not necessarily good for all the enzymes that are required for oxidative respiration, like actually making ATP from fat, right? And so some of the waste products will actually break down those enzymes and reduce our capacity to burn fat as a fuel. And so, so obviously we don't want to do that if we're training for endurance races, right? And so we do some interval training, we do some repeats and stuff like that to work on buffering our blood pH, and we want to keep the biomechanics sharp, but we want to make sure we're not doing too much so we're not changing our pH a ton and denaturing those all-important aerobic enzymes. So we want to stay right below that crossover point. And so where is that crossover point? It's somewhere between 80 and 88% of our maximal heart rate for most of us, right? I always urge my runners, and this is a rule of thumb I use myself, when in doubt, back off. Because it's better to be a little slow and get a little less stimulus than go over and be counterproductive, right? And that's the number one mistake people make when they're doing threshold work, is we work too hard. And so we're not actually getting the stimulus we're looking for. We're just doing a really low quality interval workout that's way too long, right? It's not super productive. And this is why a lot of folks that just go run every day, you know, that speed feels good. You feel like you're getting a good workout, but it's not super productive. And so if you're just going out and running hard every day, that's normally what you're doing, is you're over that lactate threshold part, but you're not running hard enough to really stress the central nervous system and all that kind of stuff. You're just kind of in that gray area where you're not getting a lot out of it. So if you're doing threshold work, make sure you're below that point. And the way you can tell if you're below that point is if you go for 5 minutes, you should be able to go again after a minute of rest. And that's kind of a good place to start. Once you kind of work this into your training a little bit, you can go up to 10 minutes, take 2 minutes of rest, maybe 15 minutes, take 3 minutes of rest. I don't care who you are, you really don't need to go longer than 20 minutes at threshold. That's a pretty good threshold stimulus. And then you need to take at least 4 minutes of recovery. And even then, that's a pretty good workout for most of us. If you are really fit and you're a high volume runner, you can probably break it up and do like 3 or 4 10-minute threshold intervals in there. But for most of us mere mortals, you know, 2 or 3 10-minute pushes should be sufficient. And you can work these into a long run. You can do a dedicated threshold workout where you get a couple of easy miles to warm up, do your drills, your striders, etc. And then do 3 to 4 5-minute threshold intervals, or you can do a couple of 10-minute ones and maybe a 5-minute one on the end, depending on where your total weekly volume is at. And so that's the other way people can kind of push these a little too hard, is by making them too much a part of your weekly volume. So we need to make sure that roughly 80% of our total training time is easy, right? Because in the bigger picture, in the longer term, the most important part is the ability to deliver oxygen to our muscles, right? Cardiovascular capacity, capillary bed density, being able to get blood moving around, that's kind of the biggest limiting factor, right? And if we're spending all our time at threshold pace, one, we're not going to recover very quickly, and that's going to result in being broken down. And so you'll get more quality work in over the course of a month or a year if more of those miles are easy. So this is part of the reason why miles matter. So if we're getting more total weekly volume in, that means we can get more total quality work in, doing threshold work and interval work, etc., without overdoing it on our body. We're still recovering. It's still relatively a small proportion of our total volume. So yeah, don't get too greedy with it. You know, you can do 1 or 2 threshold workouts a week. One thing I know a lot of folks like doing is, you know, if you're doing a long, easy run and you're feeling good, you open it up on the last couple miles, put the hammer down a little bit, hit that threshold pace on the tail end. And so it'll be hard, right? Because we're tired from the long run. But it allows us to kind of open up and get a little bit of that threshold stimulus. Or if you're doing in the middle of the week and you're doing like an easy 45-minute run or something like that, you know, you can go, you know, half an hour easy, open up for 5 minutes, do 5 minutes at threshold pace, and then back it off for the last 10 minutes and use that as your cool down. So let me know what you think. How much threshold work do you do? Do you work too hard? Are you not working hard enough? Is it something you use at all? Let me know. I'll be kind of curious. And I'll be kind of curious to know how you use it in conjunction with the rest of your training, because you don't have to do just one thing in a workout. You can do multiple things. So leave a comment down below, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell down here. Stay tuned, and I will talk to you next week. Till next week, train smart.